Could the resurrection be a lie made up by the disciples to persuade people to believe in the afterlife? Wow. That is what this student is actually claiming in this video, and he's trying to prove to Stuart. Let's watch this together.
I've never seen anyone get resurrected. Why should I believe that it happened 2,000 years ago? That's not putting your faith in God. That's putting your faith in the passage of human knowledge. And I do not trust that whatsoever.
Excellent. I totally agree. But if there is a God, then I would think it's rather easy for him to pause what we view as the natural law and raise his son from the dead. I think that would be very easy, actually. And so in light of the fact that 400 million people in Asia alone claim to have experienced miracles in the supernatural, I don't think it's a ridiculous leap to say that the supernatural occurred 2,000 years ago with the resurrection. All right, Stuart, but what in the world is the evidence then? All right. One, every scholar across the nation would say that Jesus existed, right? Pretty much. Two, vast majority, about 98%, said that he died on a cross. All right, we can go there. Thirdly, the majority believe that he was buried in a well-known tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, who gave up his reputation. He was high up in the Sanhedrin, as well as Nicodemus. Something about them, they were willing to turn it all over just to bury Jesus. Fourthly, women were the first to the tomb. They would have been completely discounted their testimony in a court of law. And so why would the disciples not have changed that to make this seem more like, hey, it really happened? Let's say men were the first to the tomb who discovered him. Fifthly, the disciples, every scholar agrees, for the most part, say that these disciples had some type of crazy interaction with who they thought was the risen Christ. You could say it was actually Jesus, or you could say they all hallucinated, they were all on DMT trips or mushrooms of some sort, and they had this crazy hallucination. You know, that sometimes happens when you suffer and you have these dreams and revelations when you're suffering. Could be. Then all of a sudden you had even more encounter and these radical life changes. So that's number 6. Radical life change. All of a sudden, his half-brother James, who again, huge leader in the early Sanhedrin, gives up his life when his whole life he was calling his brother crazy, a lunatic for claiming to be God. But now all of a sudden is willing to die for this claim? What about Peter? All of a sudden went from denying Jesus to a 4-year-old schoolgirl to all of a sudden be willing to die upside down on a cross? Endless amounts. And then lastly, what in the world? How do you have overnight thousands of Jews becoming Christians? They would have had way more hoops to jump through to believe in something like the resurrection than us in our scientific day and age. I'm dead serious. We in our scientific age say, oh no way that could happen. They would have expected a general revelation at the end of time, and they never would have expected this suffering servant. They would say, no, a political, powerful leader would come and upend the Roman Empire. So if you don't believe the resurrection occurred, or you don't believe that Jesus claimed to be God, or you don't believe in the Christian movement at all, I just would need to hear historical evidence for a better conclusion.
Well, I don't think this debate is very important. I think we could go in circles round and round, and we'd never come to a concrete answer.
Well, no, what is the historical evidence, though?
Well, okay,
That it didn't
can't
happen.
give you any. You can't give me any that it did happen. Any
I just gave you
physical.
I just gave you 10 lines.
No. But witness testimonies. That's not pure evidence, like archaeological evidence. I would need to see some sort of that. I can't really give you the best answer. What I'm really wondering is why it's important for me to believe that rather than to believe that the miracle of God, that God is.
All right, do you know that eyewitness testimony is still the #1 line of hardest pieces of evidence in the court of law? I always thought it was DNA evidence. Eyewitness testimony is higher. So we have the best form of evidence, even today, back then, to Jesus having existed, his claims, and actually having been raised from the dead. So don't ever let anybody come to you and say, oh, it's just eyewitness testimony. No, that's the #1 line of evidence, even today in the court of law. Pretty cool that God gave us the #1 line of evidence.
It could have been a bunch of people in a circle and they all agreed to tell the same lie. Still in good faith, it was still for a good reason, but it doesn't make it true, and it doesn't have to be true in order for you to believe, I think.
Okay. They would have given up land, property, finances, reputation, ultimately their lives to believe this. So if you're going to go with that line of thinking, you're going to have to say, and they would have died for what they knew to be a lie. Nobody dies, any psychologist will tell you that, for what they know to be a lie. They'll die for some great ideology, but they're never going to die for what they know to be a lie. And so why just overnight would thousands of people and hundreds of eyewitnesses just say, hey, let's all get together and make up this fantasy fanciful story where we're going to give up all of our land, property, all of our relatives, and our very lives just for the sake of this great story.
I think you'd agree that it's the most convincing idea of after death. You know, it's if we don't have a justification, if there's no punishment for doing evil, doing sin, then, you know, I can do whatever I want. And because I believe that there is moral truth out there, you know, I would fight for that.
Okay, but I don't believe that you truly believe that the Christian ideal of heaven and what Christ called us to is the most tantalizing, something that you want to just give your life up for randomly. No, he said you have to hate your father and mother to be my disciple. He said, let the dead bury their own dead. He said, it's tremendously offensive. You are a dirty, rotten sinner, so much so that I had to die on the cross for you. There's nothing about that to me. Maybe for you, if you're masochistic, I am not a masochist. There is nothing about that that jives with my pride. My pride says, no, hate my father and mother in terms of paling in comparison and worshiping you. Worshiping you? No. Giving up my life to serve you? No, you calling me a rotten sinner? No, nothing about that. I don't want to die for that. And so it wasn't just this some great ploy or hoax where, hey, let's get all people together. We're going to believe in judgment, sin, these offensive narratives that Jesus is pushing, but let's just say they're okay. And let's just all die for it. There's no historical evidence behind that for having happened. Secondly, I don't think it's tantalizing or attractive. I think eternal life is, but a lot of what Christ taught, there's a reason why so many followers even were taken off. But look at John chapter 6. Look at his ascension. How many people doubted and then said, whoa, too much. That's too radical for me. I'm taking off.
Okay, so first, this student is arguing and saying that we don't see resurrections happening, right? Naturally, we see men, they die, they stay dead, and we don't see resurrections taking place. But that is the point. If we saw resurrections taking place every Tuesday and every Thursday, we wouldn't be having this discussion, my friend. The whole point we're arguing and we're having this discussion is that a resurrection is a supernatural event. It's a groundbreaking historical event where God interceded and he raised Jesus from the dead. That's the whole point. Second, Stuart gave him some really good evidence supporting the resurrection of Jesus. And he dodges all that evidence by basically saying, you know what, I don't like that evidence. You know, it's not good enough for me. I want fossil, something like the fossil records. However, is it really here the problem that's going on is evidence? Because come on, let's be real here. People saw Jesus, they saw the miracles, they listened to his teachings, and they still rejected him. I mean, even the disciple Thomas, he only believed after he went and saw the resurrected Christ, but he doubted it at start. And many people also rejected and persecuted the disciples, even though they saw the miracles that the disciples were doing in the name of Jesus, and they still refused to believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and they refused to believe that this is the divine Son of God, the Messiah. So is it really evidence that's the problem here, or is it a heart problem? Is it that, oh my, how do I deal with this evidence that Stuart has given me right now? Because if this is true, what does this mean for my life? What would I have to change? Most people, when you actually dig into the problem, it's a problem of the heart. Lastly, I don't think he understood what Stuart was saying. He thinks it's more of, well, I think the disciples made this up because it's convenient. You know, if we die, you know, we're going to go to this nice afterlife. I don't get to do what I want. There's punishment of sin. And Stuart did a phenomenal job of pointing out that the Christian message is not such an appealing message. Historians, when they assess an historical event, they assess it using different criteria. For example, explanatory scope, explanatory power. Explanatory scope is how many facts does the theory explain. For example, we could say aliens abducted Jesus. Well, that explains the empty tomb. But what does it not explain? It does not explain the transformation of the disciples, the transformation of the Apostle Paul or James, or the appearances of Jesus. So it fails in explanatory scope. And in explanatory power is how well does a theory explain events. For example, let's say, like he said, the disciples lied. Well, that explains the empty tomb. It explains the disciples going around saying Jesus rose from the dead. But what it fails to explain, Stuart pointed this out, people don't die for something they know to be a lie. So it doesn't explain their transformation. They left everything for this message. Their homes, they were persecuted and eventually got killed for this message. It doesn't explain the transformation of the Apostle Paul because the disciples lied, sure, but what about the Apostle Paul? He persecuted Christians. What about James? James was basically saying that his brother brother was nuts, right? Why would he become a Christian? So it doesn't explain these. So sure, you could come up with all these different theories. They hallucinated, they lied, Jesus had a twin. But we have to look and remember this is a historical event. It's not based on emotions. You have to come to the most rational and best explanation. And so far, the only one that stands to be true is the resurrection. The resurrection accounts for all these things. You're open to give your theories, but in the end of the day, how best does it explain this? Anyways, those are my thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what do you think. What best explains these events, the transformation and all these different events? And please, if you enjoyed this content, subscribe to my channel, follow Daily Pursuit of Truth, and as always, keep pursuing truth and living for the one who's truth himself. God bless you.